I want to tell you all just a little bit about Adriana because she's a fascinating person. So Adriana started out, she was born and raised in France, in Italy, and she has over the time transitioned from working in business and entrepreneurship to marketing for luxury and cosmetic companies in New York City. She worked at Twitter through a startup that was acquired by Twitter, doing advertising technology and marketing. And now she is working on virtual reality and augmented reality applications. And she recently wrote some articles about VR and AR that I've linked to below. If you want to read along, she knows quite a bit about the topic, and that's going to be the focus of our talk today. So Adriana, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and how you got interested in VR and AR?
Yes, so I'm Adriana. Hi again, everybody. I am French and Italian, and my interest for VR and AR dates from way before we were talking about virtual reality, or at least I had heard about it from when I was a kid, because I was always interested in making imaginary worlds and so on. So back then I would draw a lot, write stories and so on. But what really seduced me in VR is that I could translate those ideas, those worlds, like in a much more accurate way, much more faithful way, rather than a sketch or a painting and so on. So that's why I'm into VR. Right now I'm working in VR and in VR development in order to make VR development as easy and accessible to anyone who has ideas to just turn them into pixels.
Great. And Adriana, you're currently working as a consultant, helping other companies build VR and AR experiences. That's what you're doing right now?
Yeah, so I'm a freelance product designer. I help brands and companies, like either I consult them on their VR strategy if they're new to this field, or I help them build their first VR experience from scratch. So it goes from the creative side, make sure that their ideas make sense in VR and are technically feasible. And then it's about leading the design and development with the teams who build the project.
Awesome. And you've been interested in VR for a while. What was the main thing that really drew you into VR? What was the moment that you thought, oh, I really want to get into this space?
Yeah, so it was a few years ago. It was an exhibition organized by HBO around Game of Thrones. And at the end of the exhibition, they had Oculus Rifts. And at the time, Oculus was not acquired by Facebook yet, so it wasn't really well known. I was curious to try it, but I didn't have really high expectations. And when I tried the experience, like if you're familiar with the Game of Thrones show, so you go on top of the wall, and then the little platform inside which you're standing like starts free falling back into the ground because there is an invasion from the White Walkers. And when I was doing this experience, like the platform you're in doesn't move, obviously, but I had the feeling that I was actually free falling, and my friend did record me on video and I'm shaking and screaming. So I was breathtaking during the experience. And then when I saw the video of me like frantically shaking as if I was holding on to my life, I was like, wow, this is actually really powerful what it can do like just in 30 seconds, like without any training beforehand or like any warm-up or preparation. So and besides, like Oculus Rift was a beta device at the time. So I thought like there's so much more we can do like in terms of building up certain emotions and developing them with people.
And you've written a lot about how a VR and AR like experience, we'll talk specifically about VR at this point, how VR is a very unique platform to develop for. You can't treat it like you treat traditional kind of rectangular apps. You talk about treating it like you're building an app that's a sphere. You're thinking in terms of spheres.
Yes. Yeah, so it's not as simple as going from 2D from 3D, because on the mobile development, there are a lot of best practices. There are a lot of things that we are used to. For instance, if you want to exit a specific screen or the application altogether, usually the exit button is on the top left corner. But in VR, you don't really have corner or frames. And initially, I was saying that there's no frame in VR, but someone during a talk actually corrected me and said it's not that there's no frame. It's the player is the frame, and the frame is our own psychology and perception and expectations. Even more so that VR is not mainstream yet, so we don't have best practices in where to put like the settings menu and so on. Therefore, one of the challenges is on the user experience, build something that's intuitive, but when we have no past experiences to refer to and so on, and with the ability to watch in any direction and actually interact and move within an experience, make sure that everything is, for instance, easy to find, but the user is not overwhelmed with a lot of options and settings and menu.
And in one of your articles, you talk about how even like the most simple thing that we take for granted in doing like a 2D experience, where you transition from one scene to the next, is quite complicated when people are immersed in this world. Like, do you just make the world go black and then suddenly they're somewhere else, or do you create some sort of narrative element, like, oh, you get hit in the head and you pass out and you wake up in a new scene? Like, how do you do that?
So it's still a challenge today. So if we talk about cinematic VR, the cinema so far has been designed for a rectangular frame, and directors have full control over what you see. And since you cannot see everything, they convert certain emotions through video editing. For instance, if you move really fast from one close-up to another, like it's a tense atmosphere. Like you have certain reflex that you recognize. But if we do this editing, like you change the perspective and the field of the point of view in VR or in 360 video, it will actually make you nauseous, because you're looking in one direction and suddenly you haven't moved, but you're looking into another direction. And by the time your brain adjusts to the new point of reference, then you have a very uncomfortable transition. Therefore, the best thing is to have like a continuous experience and guide the user or the player in the direction you want them to look at, while still respecting their freedom. Like, they're free to watch in any direction, so it doesn't have to feel forced.
And so with VR development, you actually build VR apps, and your latest tutorial shows people how they can create a VR app in about 10 minutes with the Google Cardboard and Unity 3D. Can you talk about some of the most common tools for building VR experiences?
Yeah, so in VR, there's two main types of experiences. Either it's based on video, 360 video, and so the hardest part is actually capturing this 360 footage that you will reuse. And after, like in terms of app development, you will need a 360 spherical video player. I show you how to build a basic one in the tutorial. But there's so you can either like make your own or use one that was already made through an SDK or like through a partner. And the other type of VR experience are those who are like computer generated. So those are like 3D scenes, like all like we're not using real images. It's all like made in like through 3D modeling software. So the two main tools that we would use are either like the Unity game engine or Unreal. Both are game engines, like they are used to develop mobile games, console games. but then we can create the same scene that will also be used in VR. And on top of that scene, we'll add another layer that will be the VR layer. So in the tutorial, it's the Google VR SDK that makes sure it's compatible with a headset. And what this additional layer does, it splits the screens into two and adds some fisheye distortion effect, so that when you have this screen and we're added with the distortion of the lenses of the headsets, you have this illusion of presence and perspective in 3D with the depths, the fact that you have like the perspective, like some elements are closer to you and some very far. And it's very similar than with the 3D glasses that you can use in the cinema and so on. Like your glasses, they have like there's a little difference between the left eye and the right eye, and your brain calculates the difference between those two eyes, and that's what gives you the third dimension, the perception of depths.
A lot of people are probably wondering, isn't VR development extremely difficult? Like, doesn't it involve all of the typical skills that would normally be associated with building like a 2D experience, but plus a whole lot more? In your tutorial, you kind of show how just with a few tools, which I think,
yeah,
you had like a Google Cardboard, you had an Android phone, and you had Unity 3D. And you were using, I believe, like C++ is the language that you use to create?
So it's C#. So I picked those tools because they were accessible to anyone. Unity is free. A Google Cardboard, a lot of brands gave them away, and they can cost less than $10. And Android also like are really mainstream. But also it depends if you're building an experience for HTC Vive or Oculus Rift, that have much more, their capacities are much more powerful than Android coupled with Google Cardboard. So you have many more settings to take into account. But in terms of developing the actual experience, it's not that different and difficult from what already exists in terms of game development. Because when you build your 3D scene, it's more or less the same scene and the same assets that you reuse. You could actually build a master project for like console gaming, mobile gaming, and VR. But the difference for VR is we navigate differently. We have different way to interact with the environment and the elements. For instance, if you're on a console or on a phone, then you can add like screen overlay with your score, how long you've been playing, how many enemies you've killed, and so on. You can also do that in VR, but since it feels like you're inside, if you have some floating elements that give you like all those information, it can be a little awkward and so on. But technically, it's like the beginning is the same as the game development for any other games. It's just after like you have to fine-tune certain elements like interactions, navigation, input and outputs of the player within the game.
So, yeah, if somebody were theoretically to just get started, they had some basic programming knowledge, the tools that you recommend in that article, you think that's a solid starting point for them?
It's basic in the sense that it allows you to have something that you can build from scratch, from start to finish, and that you can show around to your friend, instead of like just doing step one of a very ambitious project that will never see the lights because it's too difficult. So I suggest like first starting with iteration with like something small, but that's always achievable and that's always something that you can show, and then build complexity as you go. But if you're like an experienced game developer, it's actually a nice challenge to start with a project you've already done on another platform like mobile or console, and then try to port it to VR. So it may seem easy at first, like for instance, dropping some SDKs for Google Cardboard, Samsung Gear VR, or Oculus. But then when you actually test your game, you will realize that there are a lot of things that have to be changed, and some things that makes complete sense to the environment on the screen are uncomfortable or difficult in VR.
So talking about some of the things that are uncomfortable or difficult in VR, there are a number of things that people speculate have kept VR from becoming fully mainstream. I mean, technically we've had VR since like the early 90s, I guess, in terms of just putting on a headset, be in a 3D environment. Obviously graphics have come a long way since then. A lot of other technologies have improved. But what would you say are the main things that are the main challenges that VR needs to overcome if it wants to be completely mainstream like mobile phones are?
Yes, so the first thing about the VR market is it's driven by the hardware. And today the hardware has come a really long way, because when you put on some headsets like HTC Vive or the Oculus Rift, you have a real sense of presence, a real immersion into the experience. However, the hardware is still limited. Like, for instance, there's no standalone VR headsets apart from for Oculus and HTC Vive. Therefore, you have to be connected to VR-friendly computers, so it doesn't work on any computer to power the experience. Therefore, it means that you cannot experience VR on any setting. It has to be in a dedicated space. It's not really mobile, but those challenges are being currently worked on. And those challenges are also limiting the software and experience now, because the software cannot go further than that. Can only do what the hardware allows it to. But in order for VR to be more mainstream, there need to be like excellent, compelling experiences that will give that will make people excited about the future of VR. And for that, there needs to be like a close collaboration between content makers, creators, artists, and storytellers, with the everyone working in tech, in order to show to the technology industry what's needed to build those stories. And historically, artists in the tech industry has not really worked hand in hand. So I think it's pretty exciting, because we start to seeing like great collaboration on that front.
Yeah, and on that note, so there's this big rush of new headsets. As you pointed out, the headsets still need to be plugged into, you know, a PlayStation or into a laptop or something that actually has all the hardware. They're not completely self-contained. But once they are self-contained and you can just grab a headset off of your dresser and put it on and lie down and be immersed, do you think that that's going to significantly increase the adoption when everything's just a nice self-contained unit?
Yes, so, well, we always have a problem with the VR headsets. Is like, since you're cut from reality, it would be dangerous to wear it in the street or anywhere where we can collide with a car or someone else. But as soon as VR headsets can be fully independent, we can see some interesting use cases emerge. Like, for instance, watching a VR movie in the plane, or some training in certain companies and so on. So you can see like a VR experience for 10 minutes, and then someone can teach you what's next and so on. So making VR headsets like fully independent and standalone will give way to our certain use cases that are currently not possible with other devices, with tablets, phones, smartphones, or laptops. And that's how we can see like adoption coming up.
And that brings me to AR, augmented reality or mixed reality, where people are wearing glasses that present them with some information, but they can still walk around and do all those things you were talking about a second ago, where you're not in danger because you still have a full field of vision, and you're not going to trip over the dog in front of you and things like that. And you've done some work in that as well. I know that you've built a few Google Glass applications back in the day, and you're very interested in some of the new AR tools that are coming out. Can you talk a little bit about your feelings about AR, and do you think AR is going to be adopted more rapidly than VR?
Yes, so I think AR and VR are very different and serve different purpose. So it doesn't make so much sense to challenge one versus the other, as we see often in the media. So VR, since you cut off from your immediate surroundings, you can be transported somewhere else. Whereas AR is supposed to enhance your current experience right here, right now, by adding additional information that could be useful, or by mixing it up with imaginary elements to challenge it and make it more entertaining. So AR is very different in that sense that when you build an AR experience, you don't fully control the environment in which the player will use your app, and it will be actually a better experience if you can use these elements like to interact further with your app. Whereas with VR, you have full control on like what they see. You can make sure that they use it indoor, like somewhere with a strong Wi-Fi connection and so on, but not with AR. And therefore, with AR is useful if the experience is modified with how the way the user interact with it and so on, by adding contextual information, like for instance, the directions to go somewhere, or if you get closer to a certain location, then certain events are triggered that are relevant to the user. So I think in some sense that in VR, the user can be like very active and go for what they want and explore, whereas in AR, in some sense, they can be more passive towards the experience, because the experience should bring them contextual information at the right place at the right moment. And they can be active towards what they're doing outside of the app, like in the activity they were doing, whether they were doing fitness activities or exploring somewhere new and so on.
So some of these societal challenges to having AR really catch on is a lot of people don't feel comfortable being photographed everywhere they go. And I know that Google Glass was heavily criticized when people started wearing it out on the street, and people were uncomfortable in the subway when they saw somebody who had a camera that was recording. And yet Snapchat spectacles have been a huge hit, and people seem to love them. Can you talk about some of the differences between those, and why you think Snapchat spectacles was relatively well received?
Yes, one of the reasons Google Glass didn't find its audience is from the 1984 fear of being recorded all the time, and especially with the recent scandals like NSA and so on. It's a very present fear. However, so the fact that there was a camera that could record you in a very discreet way was not well received. However, we meet sometimes in the street people with GoPros that are likely recording, or Snapchat spectacles, and that doesn't make people uncomfortable. And I believe the reason why is because it's the GoPros or Snapchat spectacles are associated with things that are fun and playful. GoPro is mostly used for like sport performances and so on, for putting on a show, like showing the best version of yourself. The Snapchat spectacles look like any other sunglasses if you're not familiar with the device. But if you are, you can tell when people are recording you, because there's a highly visible animation. And instead of having a red light that's blinking to say that it's on, it's like a nice light that's rotating a bit like a shooting star. So therefore, like the appearance of a toy in both cases, or a gadget, makes it makes it appear like to be harmless and just for fun. So I think in order for those devices to be adopted, there needs to be like another purpose. In that case, the fun, sharing emotions, that will like a compelling use case that will engage people to adopt them, share what they want to, rather than just give them in their hand like, this is a new technology, you can do anything with that, but instead package it as a tool, as a toy, not new technology.
What do you think some of the use cases for AR that people haven't really discussed a lot lately? The general public is still pretty new to this idea, but you're probably thinking about the applications of AR all the time. What are some really useful things that you think people will be able to do with AR that they don't even realize is possible right now, or they haven't even thought about?
So I can talk more about VR for the future, but with AR, what I'm really hopeful is, so today, whether we work on a laptop or on a mobile phone or a tablet, we're still watching a screen instead of watching in front of us. So there's still this barrier between us and the reality, even though the promise of the smartphone is the smartphone can be anywhere with you, so you don't have to be stuck to your computer. But still, when we are texting friends, we're not interacting with the people around us and so on. So I believe, I hope that AR will be able in 5, 10, 20 years to work in a way that doesn't distract from reality, but it really enhances it. It makes it easier, funnier to interact with, but that doesn't add an extra layer on top of it that hides you from what's around you.
Well, I want to shift gears here. You are currently in Indonesia, is that correct,
Yeah,
Ariana?
correct. Yes.
I think a lot of people have been wondering, like, oh, wow, so she was in Europe, and then she was in the US, and now she's in Asia. You've traveled a lot over the last few years. And
yes.
you work remotely?
Yeah, I do. Yes. I've always been very curious, and I always want to meet people who had like different mindsets, who approach problems differently and so on, with different cultures. And therefore I've been like always trying to go in like to travel in different countries for that. So I'm thankful because what the work I'm doing now, like mostly like I need like a strong Wi-Fi internet connection, and I don't need so much to be in an office. Therefore, I'm able like for like 1 month, a couple of months to settle down in a certain place, meet the local startup ecosystem, some different like VR players and so on and so on. And yeah, so so it's mostly like leveraging the latest technology tools. So in terms of communication, in terms of video conferencing and so on. Also adjusting the time zone sometimes to make it work. And this is something that's getting more and more accessible today.
Yeah, well, awesome. I'm thrilled that you're able to travel around, and it doesn't seem to impede. It sounds like it actually enhances your creativity and your ability to get things done, that you're moving around so much and interfacing with so many people.
Yes, because sometimes, so when you are at in the same place all the time, you go from your apartment, from where you live, to the office where you work. You tend to repeat the same thought framework. Therefore, if you have a problem, you will approach it the same way over and over. Whereas sometimes something just as simple, like going somewhere away for the weekend or for some vacations, you are in another environment. Therefore, your automatisms are different. Like you lose your point of references, so that you lose like your pre-made recipes and framework, and you think differently. So I'm trying to push it forward by trying to understand how people work in different places and so on, and solve their problems differently in order to try to adapt it to a broader range of challenges in some sense.
Well, we're all going to be very excited to hear about your next adventures and the projects you work on. and read some more of your amazing tutorials, of course. If people want to follow you, where can they find you?
On Twitter. So my Twitter handle is at Adriana Vec, ADRIANA VECC.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, Adriana. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Quincy.
And yeah, have a beautiful evening.
Have a good day. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.